Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Health Wealth podcast. We've got a brilliant episode coming up today, which I've been really excited to do. This is our first in our series on health that we're doing. Our first topic this week is diabetes, which we're going to get into and really try and educate you on what it is, what happens in it, how you can deal with it, how you can prevent it, all of those things. So I'm joined again by Barry. So how are you this week, Barry?
I'm doing great, Ryan. Pleased to be here, and looking forward to another episode where we'll be getting more into the topic of diabetes and all terms and around the science around that. For those who are struggling with it and are experiencing it, and how to actually resolve it, strategies to resolve it. So it's a big topic. We won't get everything in on this episode, but we will get the bulk of it in, and we'll be delving further into it in later episodes. But apart from that, all good, and looking forward to it.
Brilliant. Yeah. With the aim, as we said before, is just to educate people, and to give them the knowledge. So, like you said, we might not get everything in this episode. We'll see how it goes. We might break it up into two so we can really, give people the details that we need. And again, we want to make it so people can understand it. So I don't want to get too sciencey, but we have to do some science because, we need to tell people how it works. And it's good to understand. Once you understand how it works and, okay, this causes this, and if I stop doing this, it won't cause that. It helps you to deal with it easier. So we got to get into some science, but we're going to try and make it as clear and as understandable as we can do.
So we were just going to kick off with delving into what hemoglobin is and how that relates to the topic of diabetes.
Yes, so the HbA1c is the main measurement used to diagnose diabetes, which stands for hemoglobin A1c. So a bit later on, we'll get to exactly what it is, but it's basically a measure of damage to red blood cells, and that's essentially what it is.
There's another term that we've got, CGM.
Yeah, so that's a constant glucose monitor, which is what a lot of diabetics wear. It's very good for diabetics to wear because it gives you a constant reading of your blood glucose, and you can see when you eat something, you can see how your body actually reacts. So it's really good to teach you how your body reacts to certain foods and what they're actually doing to your body.
Yeah, and one of the things you went into recently was fasting blood glucose, because we talk about fasting a lot and we talk about blood glucose, how that is, obviously it's a combination there.
Yes, so the fasting blood glucose is your blood glucose level, and then the fasting blood insulin is your fasted insulin level. So they're both after 8 to 12 hours fasted. But you can get, like, the CGM will be giving you just blood glucose measurements, but the fasted is specifically, you have to be fasted for 8 to 12 hours. And same with the insulin. Again, you could just get an insulin level at any point, but the fasted one gives us a more accurate reading, which would be after 8 to 12 hours of fasting, which I would always say go for 12. The guidelines say 8 to 12, but I would say 12 is better.
To be clear, to be absolutely clear.
Yeah. Just to make sure there's nothing, your food's been fully processed and it's not affecting your score and your level. Yeah.
And we've also mentioned before lipogenesis as well.
Yes, so there's lipogenesis is the creation of fats, and then there's gluconeogenesis is something we'll talk about as well, which is the creation of glucose in the body from fats and protein. So they're two things where our body's creating stuff. So lipogenesis is fat, gluconeogenesis is glucose.
Yeah. And we've got hyperglycemia and hypoglycemia.
Yeah, so there's a number of different ones. So the easy way to remember is hyper means too much of something, and hypo means not enough. So there's like hyperglycemia and hypoglycemia, which is obviously hyperglycemia is too much, high blood sugar. Hypo is low. That's why they say about diabetics having hypo if they get low blood sugar. And then you've got hyperinsulinemia and hypoinsulinemia. Again, is too high, too low. Hypertension means high blood pressure, and hypertriglyceridemia, which is a tongue twister, and that's triglycerides as well.
Triglycerides, yeah. And the one they used to describe low insulin, hypoinsulinemia.
Yeah,
Have I got
that's
that
right.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then obviously we've got hypertension, which is a term used for high blood pressure as well. So
Yeah.
these all correspond to and related to the topic of diabetes. And if you are suffering from it, then you will hear these terms are really, really important to understand the difference between them. What
Yeah.
is a good level and what is not a good level. And where you need to be. So we're gonna get into that.
Yeah.
And then just to finish off the terms, we've got endogenous and exogenous. So endo, I assume, is
Yeah.
something that is internal, isn't it?
Yeah. So endogenous and exogenous. So that's like endogenous glucose is glucose you produce in your body. Exogenous is what you're taking in from outside in your diet. So yeah, when we're talking about glucose levels, you might hear one of those words. So endogenous is made in your body. Exogenous is from outside.
And from a health perspective, we want to be aiming for the endogenous, right? Endogenous.
That's the thing, because there's actually no need, as we've talked about a lot, there's no need for exogenous carbohydrates or glucose in our diet because we make it ourselves. We make
Yeah.
enough endogenous. But yeah, that's the difference for when we're talking about it, so people know what we're talking about.
Yeah. And that brings us nicely on to diabetes, which obviously is a huge issue, not just in the UK but worldwide. So, what would be what are how would you describe or encapsulate diabetes as a whole?
Yeah. So I've come prepared with notes because we want to get all the education right for people. So what I've done is I've found the definition of diabetes from a couple of different places to give people a rough overview. So being in the UK, we start with the NHS UK. So this is on their website. So they're talking about type 2 diabetes here. So type 2 diabetes is a
There's
common
type 2 and
condition.
type 1, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll run through the differences of them at some point as well because they are different. So type 2 is a common condition that causes the level of sugar or glucose in the blood to become too high. So, they're right there. That's what it does. It can cause symptoms like excessive thirst, needing to pee a lot, tiredness, and can increase your risk of serious problems with eyes, heart, and nerves. It says it's a lifelong condition that can affect your everyday life. So that's one sentence I would disagree with, in that they're saying that it's not reversible, but we think it is. But anyway, it says here, which is interesting, you may need to change your diet, take medicines, and have regular checkups. So they actually talk about dietary change there, which is good. However, as we'll find out later, their idea of dietary change is actually not very good in relation to diabetes.
No.
And they go on to say it's caused by problems with a chemical in the body, a hormone called insulin, and it's often linked to being overweight or inactive or having a family history of type 2 diabetes. Which again, overweight and inactive, yes. Family history of type 2 diabetes, again, like we've talked about before, it's not really genetic, but what it is that if your parents have poor lifestyle that leads to diabetes, chances are they'll pass on that lifestyle to you and you could get diabetes. It's not your genes giving you diabetes, it's the lifestyle that you've taken on board. So then there's the World Health Organization. They describe it as diabetes is a chronic metabolic disease characterized by elevated levels of blood glucose, which leads over time to serious damage to the heart, blood vessels, eyes, kidneys, and nerves. The most common is type 2, usually in adults, and occurs when the body becomes resistant to insulin or doesn't make enough insulin. I mean, overall, a pretty good description. And they say about in the past 3 decades, it's risen dramatically of countries of all income levels. So basically everyone.
So it's a
They
global
then talk.
problem.
It is a global problem. Yeah, that's the thing. It's not limited. Some countries might be worse than others, but it's not limited worldwide. We're seeing this as a big problem. So they also talk about type 1, which was once known as juvenile diabetes or insulin-dependent diabetes. That's a chronic condition which the pancreas produces little or no insulin by itself. And for people living with diabetes, access to affordable treatment, including insulin, is critical to their survival. So, I mean, overall, a reasonably decent description, but you notice how they put a lot of emphasis on insulin and needing insulin because that's what these places are concerned with, because that's the drug that they're trying to sell to you and push to you. Then last one I'll just run through is the CDC. So that's obviously America. So they say diabetes is a chronic, long-lasting health condition that affects how your body turns food into energy. So again, they're saying it's long-lasting. You can't do anything about it. And interesting, they mention about food into energy, which last week when we were talking about metabolic health, that's one of the things of metabolic health is you can't properly use energy. They say your body breaks down most of the food you eat into sugar, which again I would disagree with. If your diet's mostly carbs, then yeah, that breaks down into sugar, but protein and fats doesn't. So I would slightly disagree with that. It says release it into your bloodstream. When blood sugar goes up, it signals your pancreas to release insulin. Insulin acts like a key to let the blood sugar into your body cells for use as energy, which again is a pretty good description of insulin's job, which it is. But the one of the reasons that it wants to get it into the body's cells is not just for energy, it's also because it wants to get it out your bloodstream, because high glucose in your bloodstream is extremely dangerous. So it wants to get it out of there as soon as it can. With diabetes, your body doesn't make enough insulin, can't use it as well as it should. When there isn't enough insulin or cells stop responding, too much blood sugar stays in your bloodstream, and over time that can cause serious health problems like heart disease, vision loss, and kidney disease. So basically they all talk about the fact that it's from blood sugar being too high and then having issues with insulin. And the last thing I'll just quickly touch on is what qualifies someone as diabetic. So to medically qualify someone as diabetic, they need a HbA1c of above 6.5%. So that's what we covered that in our terms. So above 6.5, you're classed as diabetic. If you're 5.7 to 6.4, you're classed as pre-diabetic. And below that, you're classed as normal. Whatever, however much we want to go along.
Would you say pre-diabetic, that's the area in which they're not quite diabetic yet, but they're heading that way?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a more recent thing they've introduced. Really, at the point you're pre-diabetic, you've got serious insulin resistance, and you're going to be already developing health issues. You're basically diabetic, but they've kind of invented a new condition where you're not quite diabetic, but you're pre-diabetic. But if you're in the pre-diabetic range, you need to be doing something about it. Definitely.
Yeah, because the cells in your body are struggling to absorb the sugar in the bloodstream.
Yeah, exactly. You're already at that point where you're having the issues. And one of the things with diabetes is that with type 2, although it happens over a long period of time, it's the first stage, and the insulin resistance happens over a long time. There's kind of a tipping point, and once you go past that point and you're diagnosed diabetic or even slightly in pre-diabetic, it actually moves quite fast. And so you want to be taking action before it reaches that point.
And delving into the difference between type 1 and type 2, what would you say the main differences are?
Yeah, so there's a kind of a big difference. I mean, the thing that there's nuance to it. Again, we want to keep it as simple as we can. To begin with, they're almost opposite, although people think they're the same. So type 1 is actually an autoimmune condition. Essentially, what happens is, for whatever reason, your body attacks itself in certain areas, which is what happens in autoimmune, and it attacks the cells in your pancreas and basically destroys them, and you can't produce insulin. So people with type 1, they can either produce a tiny amount of insulin or they can't produce any at all. So that's why they need insulin. So type 1s actually do need insulin. But obviously, by improving diet and lifestyle, they can lower the amount they need, but they do need it.
Yeah.
So type 2 is different because type 2 is a metabolic lifestyle condition. It's completely caused by your lifestyle and your diet. That's right. And it's actually a disease of too much insulin. Now, eventually, if you have it over a long period of time unchecked, eventually it can lead to low insulin, because the high insulin eventually damages your pancreas so much that you then stop producing as much. But to begin with, it's a disease of too much insulin, and type 1 is a disease of too little insulin. So they're opposite ends. But yet we treat them, well, not exactly the same, but we kind of treat them the same in that we give insulin to both of them. But as you can tell, and as we'll learn as we go along, type 1s need insulin. Type 2s, at first, they don't need insulin. They just need to sort their lifestyle out, and then they won't ever get to the point of actually needing insulin. So that's the main difference.
Yeah, as you say, no medication required, no doctor's intervention as such, just knowing what to do what to eat and when to eat it and what to cut out, and of course cutting out a lot of the inflammatory foods which cause that. So it's just knowing basically what to do and having the discipline to carry it out, and you'll resolve a lot of these problems, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey guys, this January you can embark on a journey of transformation with our 30-day New Year, New You challenge. You can let this year be the year that you rewrite your story, starting with a healthier and happier chapter. Discover the power of nourishing your body with wholesome, delicious meals. Our January challenge is not just about resolutions. It's about creating sustainable habits that will redefine your relationship with food and jumpstart your weight loss journey. And here's the exciting part. The amazing results from our last challenge speak for themselves. Participants experienced incredible transformations, shedding pounds, gaining energy, and radiating newfound confidence. With our proven approach, you're not just making resolutions, you're achieving real, tangible results. Say goodbye to the old and welcome the new you with open arms. Visit our website now and kick off the year with purpose. Let's make January the month that you redefine the story of your health and well-being. Are you ready for a fresh start? Because every day is a chance for a new beginning, and your success story starts here.
Where do you think the in terms of the history of diabetes, when did that become most prevalent? Was it just after like the agricultural revolution, or was it more recent times where we're having more convenience foods and it's all accelerated at that point and through the populace? What would you say was the starting point or the source of this problem?
It's been around for a long time, but obviously in recent times it's gone increased by crazy amounts. But it's been around a long time. So the actual name, so the full name for diabetes is diabetes mellitus or mellitus, however you want to pronounce it. So that actually is very old. That comes from, so diabetes is a Greek word which means to pass through. Mellitus is a Latin word which means sweet. So it basically means sweet urine, because the people who had diabetes had sugary urine. So it smelled sweet, it was sweet, they had sugar in it. And that phrase, I think, was first used in about 250 to 300 BC. So that's how long ago that we kind of knew what diabetes was, in terms of the fact that it was too much sugar and it was coming out. Then the first kind of written case study of diabetes was all the way back in 1797. So that's again, it's over 200 years ago that it was written, and actually a case study done by John Rollo. And he realized then 200 years ago, he could tell that it was too much sugar, and he prescribed for his patients a really high fat, almost carnivore diet 200 years ago, and he knew how to treat it. And in 1848 we discovered that the liver produced glucose and we didn't need any exogenous glucose. So from that point we knew that we didn't have to have glucose in the diet. We knew that diabetes was caused by too much sugar, and low carb was the diet prescribed. So both for type 1 and type 2, until insulin was discovered, which was in 1922, up until that point a low carb diet was the accepted treatment for both type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and worked very well. But once insulin was discovered in 1922, then they began to remove the restrictions on carb intake for diabetics and began to encourage them to eat more, which obviously meant they needed more insulin, which was great because insulin is a drug that makes them money selling. So they wanted them to need more insulin because it makes them money. So for an example is that before 1922, before insulin was discovered, the prescribed diet for type 1 was 25 grams of carbs a day max. So that's great. That's very low carb. And that's, today you'd be looking at getting 25, 30 below that. And then even as soon as 1940, it had gone up to 172 grams, which is high. And it's gone much higher than that since. So you can see how quickly things started to change from 25 up to 172. And
That's a huge difference.
That's up a lot. And I'll just quickly jump back to there was a guy called George Campbell who in the 1960s, he basically he was studying the Zulus, and he began to notice that some of them were starting to get diabetes, to develop diabetes. And he tracked them and he researched them, whatever. And he basically found that it takes about 32 to 36 kilograms of sugar per year over 20 years will cause you to develop diabetes. So he developed this thing called the 20-year rule. And he spoke to other researchers in other areas who basically confirmed it with him and found pretty much the same. So that works out at about 21 teaspoons of sugar per day, which is just under 100 grams per day. And if you have that over 20 years, that overconsumption, you develop diabetes. Obviously, if you've got higher, you could develop it maybe slightly quicker. But obviously, we look at in the 1940s, we're already up to 172 grams for a type 1. That's higher than what you'd need to develop it. So that's just kind of showing how bad that advice is. And then from there, the real killer was in 1977, the US dietary guidelines, where they basically said saturated fat was to blame for everything. You want to eat low fat, seed oils, lots of carbs to replace your fats and all of that. And that basically killed it. Obesity started going up then. And 20 years on, pretty much exactly 20 years on from 1977, the obesity epidemic really took off, which lines up again with the 20-year rule that George Campbell had, that, you know, that they massively increased carb intake, and 20 years later, diabetes was completely and utterly rife. So it basically lined up with that. And in 1965, the average American got more calories from fat than carbs. So that most of their calories were coming from fat more than carbs. Now they get more than double the amount of carbs to fat, which is, you know, that's a crazy increase. So some of that, since the guidelines changed in 1977, this is some of the changes that we've seen. And this was from quite a few years ago, these stats, so it'd be even higher now. But these kind of give you an idea of what's changed to cause this, the food. So total calories are up by 12%. Carbs are up by 30% on the amount of our overall calories we're taking in. Protein and fats is down 1%. Corn is up 100%. Vegetable oils up 89%. Sugar's up 25%. Wheat's up 21%. Eggs are down 21%. Butter and lard is down 39%. Red meat's down 24%. Dairy's down 5%. And this one I found really interesting. Chicken is up 139%. That one I found quite interesting because it kind of highlights the fact that I don't want to demonize chicken. You know, I encourage people to eat meat. Chicken can be a small part of a good diet, but I think people have swapped the better meat sources like the red meat, and they've gone to the lean, poorer quality like chicken, which chicken is not in your table of meats. Chicken's pretty low on the quality.
Yeah.
So that's gone up and replaced the better meats, as well as, you know, carbs going up and all these other grains and stuff going up. So altogether, that's contributed to a rise in obesity and a rise in diabetes.
Yeah, that was a great layout of the events in sequential order from, you know, way back to when it started, you know, or in the 1700s all the way to the present day. So that was really interesting. And yeah, I totally agree with the point on chicken. You know, I see a lot of these diets include. They all include chicken with your bit of with your broccoli and your rice and all, you know, that it really is on a very low scale when it comes to meat. There are more nutritious meats than that, and from better quality sources as well. And also your body processes red meat and is able to extract the nutrition from it a lot better than chicken. So I don't know what this modern day obsession with chicken is, but as I say, it's still a source of protein. It's still a source of some fat, and it's affordable, you know. So, but I feel that it's definitely encouraged to the detriment of more important meat sources.
Yeah, definitely, I would agree. And I think if you go back, you know, to 50, 60, 70 years to when we were eating a better diet, we didn't actually used to eat that much chicken. You know, if you look at the size of what chickens used to be, chickens were mainly for eggs. it's in more recent times where they've got all these, the chickens all piled in these, factory farm chickens, and they're fattening them up and pumping them full of stuff to make them eat. Before, they were kind of more scrawny and they were mainly for eggs. So yeah, I think it's just a cheap, effective way for them to make a food and to make profits. And people are eating it more. So yeah, it's definitely on the lower scale of quality of meat.
Yeah. And just to go back to the historic events, so would you say it was like the early 1920s when they discovered the concept of insulin, where they realised, wait a minute here, we can create a problem in order to create a solution to sell that solution and make money?
That's exactly it. It's exactly it, because as I say, they were using low carb diets very effectively to manage diabetes, because they had no other. Obviously, it worked well, and it does work well, but they didn't have an option. As soon as they found insulin, and okay, well, we can make this. We can synthesize it. We can make it. We can have it as a drug, and then we can sell it to people. Okay, but if they're all eating these low carb diets, they don't need the insulin. So we need to encourage them to eat higher carb, and then they need more insulin. And we can say, look, it's before you had to eat low carb. It's like, no, it's fine. Now you can eat more carbs and you'll be fine. You just got to take this insulin. And so people were like, okay, that's great. Because, let's face it, a lot of carbs are very tasty. I find most carbs tasty as well. I avoid them for my health, but they are very tasty. So if people were told, listen, before eating these would make you sick, but now it won't make you sick if you take this, most people are going to say, sure, I'll do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's sad. It's, they've, to the complete detriment of people's health, they've just, profit is their first thought and their main thought. And they have ruined people's ruined people's health, ended people's lives early, destroyed people's lives just for profit. Because unfortunately, if insulin was never discovered, we'd still be prescribing low carb diets, and diabetes and diabetics would be much better off.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really well put. Yeah, so we'll move on to the insulin resistance. The next part of this process. Just a bit more information about what that entails.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So yeah, insulin resistance is kind of the first stage of developing diabetes. So a lot of people are insulin resistant without being diagnosed as either pre-diabetic or diabetic. So that's the first stage. And last week when we were talking about metabolic health, and I said it was important to get a fasting insulin test. So that's something that can tell you that you become an insulin resistant before you get further down the line. Because if you've got high insulin levels, that means you've become insulin resistant. So that was first. It was first talked about by Dr. Gerald Raven when he gave a Banting lecture in 1988, and it's insulin resistance, also known as Syndrome X or metabolic syndrome. Which again, last week, that's what we were talking about, weren't we, with metabolic health? So insulin resistance is a big part of that. There's a number of components which cause it, which obviously we went through last week, talking about the metabolic health. So the central one is hyperinsulinemia, which is having too high insulin, having raised insulin, especially in response to glucose. So having it going too high, staying high for too long when you have glucose. And then obviously there's other things like high triglycerides, low HDL and stuff like that, which we spoke about last week. So you get, for the insulin resistance, there's kind of a chain. So you have insulin resistance, which causes hyperinsulinemia, which is where your insulin's too high, which causes metabolic syndrome. Then you can end up with inadequate insulin being produced, and then type 2 diabetes, because you've not got enough insulin to deal with the amount of glucose that's coming in. So we look at what kind of causes it. It's high carb intake, which increases your glucose, and then that in turn increases your insulin. So if you remember, what we talked about is that your glucose levels, your fasted glucose levels, won't be high to begin with. It will be your insulin that's high. But what you get is your glucose spikes all the time from your diet and your high carb. And that causes insulin to be higher for longer. And then the longer your insulin is high, the more insulin resistant you're going to become. And eventually that reaches a tipping point where it's also starting to affect your production of insulin. So your cells aren't responding to insulin. Your body's not producing enough insulin. and then your blood glucose will start to rise through a number of different things, and one of which is that it causes fatty liver as well, which increases the effects of that. So you're essentially, insulin resistance is essentially high carb diet causes raised insulin, that causes you to become insulin resistant, then your cells don't respond to insulin, you don't produce enough, and your blood glucose then starts to rise. So that's essentially insulin resistant, where your cells just stop responding because they've become overworked by it. Because basically what insulin does, like I think it was the CDC description, they talked about insulin being the key to put glucose into the cells. But what happens is when you're eating a high carb diet, your cells are full. And then insulin's coming along saying, can you take more glucose? And the cells are saying, no, because there's no more room. So what they have to do, if they keep taking glucose, there's no room. So what they have to do is turn down their response to insulin and stop responding to it, because they just can't take the glucose in. And that's what insulin resistance is. And then that's why your blood glucose stays high, because you can't get it out into the cells. And so that is gonna leave it high.
Yeah.
So that's the main cause of it.
Which then obviously leads to a lot of diseases and illnesses, for when the levels are glucose.
Yeah, exactly. High. So it's, as we said, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease it causes, which again, that's another big kind of precursor to diabetes. You get fatty liver before you develop diabetes. Then there's dementia, hypertension, obesity, cardiovascular disease. All these kind of things are caused by, insulin resistance is kind of the beginning of all of those things being caused.
Yeah. And how does the mechanism of type 2 diabetes, the mechanism that surrounds that?
Yes. So the mechanism essentially is from blood glucose. So what I'll do quickly is just cover, obviously, carbohydrates are what raise your glucose. Obviously, we said about high sugar, high glucose diet, but basically carbohydrates all break down into glucose. Well, you can have different types of sugars, but they break down to sugar, most of them glucose.
I was expecting you to say sucrose there.
So sucrose is a disaccharide.
Right.
So that's too much. So sucrose is fructose and glucose together. So there's monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. So the monos are what they break down to, where it's just the one molecule. The others are made up of
combinations
of one molecule. Yeah. So they all break down into glucose, and then obviously that then raises your blood sugar, because they go down through your body, through your digestive system. They're then taken into your bloodstream, and from there they're taken around the body. So that's where insulin tries to get it into all the cells to lower the amount, but that's what raises it. And I think we might have talked about this last week when we talked about metabolic health, but the amount you want to have in your bloodstream at any one time is one teaspoon of sugar, which is about 4.5 grams. So
this is about tracking your levels, isn't it?
Yes. So that's it. So this is again where the CGM comes in as really handy, because it helps you to understand what's happening to your body from the foods and what's in them, because a lot of people don't understand how much sugar's in stuff. So I'll just run through some basic ones. So one slice of bread is 15 grams. So just one slice of bread has 3 times the amount of sugar that you want in your bloodstream at any one time. And bread breaks down into sugar really quick as well in your body. A bowl of cereals, 23 to 30 grams. Can of Coke, 28. Fruit juice carton, like 250 ml fruit juice, 32 grams. 100 grams of spaghetti, which isn't that much. A lot of people probably have that in their meal. That's 70 grams. So that's, a crazy amount. 100 grams of potato or sweet potatoes, 20 grams. 1 cup of cooked rice is 20 grams. An apple is 20 grams. So just one apple is 4 times the amount you want in your bloodstream. A banana is 28 grams. 100 ml of sweetened yogurt is about 15 grams. And 100 gram bit of chocolate is 60 grams. So you can tell from those items, if you're eating a meal with, spaghetti and some other stuff, and afterwards you have an apple and you have a drink of fruit juice, you're going to be crazy amount over your blood glucose levels, and your body's going to be working overtime to deal with that. So it's kind of understanding how those things affect you. And a CGM is a great tool, like we said, because you can literally see it happen. You see how big the spikes are on your chart. It literally tells you, and you can see, okay, all I had was an apple. Look how much it spiked. And you start to understand better how to eat and how to control it. And another thing that people need to take into account is always use total carbs. They have this weird thing called net carbs, which they use, and it's like carbohydrates minus the amount of fibers, but just ignore that. Go off carbs, and also go on total carbs, not sugars. They have like total carbs 32 grams, sugars 26. That doesn't mean anything. That all of those carbs will break down to sugar eventually. So it's the total carbs is what you should be taking. And like we talked about earlier with the type 1 diet, you're aiming for 25 to 30 grams a day max. If you're a diabetic and you want to treat it, that's what you're aiming for, 25 to 30, which, going back through some of those lists of what carbs are, is not that much of them.
Yeah. So it's 25 to 30 grams of carbohydrate per day to keep it under that level.
Yeah, you want to be down there. Yeah, absolutely, to try and get that blood glucose under control.
Yeah, and interesting what you said about the apple there. I saw some influencer, a week ago, and saying that an apple was fine because it doesn't spike your blood glucose level, and actual fact in a way it does, or it doesn't spike your blood glucose level in a way that a donut does, or a muffin or something else. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a healthy choice. It's just it's complete and utter garbage what they come out with, and of course I left a comment and got some likes on it, but I was willing to enter a debate. Did I get a debate about it? No, because what these people are purporting is garbage, and this is what we're here to set straight. So
exactly, and they don't want to have a debate about it because they don't actually have anything to back it up. They just throw things out that seem cool at the time, and if someone comes who's actually got the science, then they don't want to know.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, obviously won't name it, but it does. You make no mistake about it. An apple is, as much as that has been purported right through, pop culture and just modern, the modern advertising, that it's a healthy choice. You always see it in advertising. An apple, it's not a good choice at all for these reasons.
One of the issues is that an apple of 50 years ago was completely different. They weren't sweet, they were sour, and they were small. So the sugar in an apple of 50 years ago was very different to the sugar in an apple today. And that's part of the problem. When people say that, throughout time, we would have ate some plants to survive and to get past, and we would have ate some fruit and that, and we would have. But the sugar content would not have been the same as the fruits we're eating today. So that's why we need to be careful with fruit, because it's a lot higher sugar than it used to be, and a lot higher sugar than our body can deal with.
Yeah, and that is also sort of ties into the way the standards and the way things are, or certain foods are, fertilized and reared now. That has gone down, that has decreased, and it's actually affects your health in a negative way. We can go into other examples of that, but
it's completely right. You are completely right. It's it's the quality of the food as well, not just it's not just what food it is, it's the quality. Even like we said with chicken is another example that chicken's gone up, but is it that good a quality of meat? Should it be your main meat? And like you said, you look at health influencers and people in the gym all the time. What are they eating every day? Is chicken. Most of them are not eating beef. They're not eating lamb. They're eating chicken mostly, and that's a poorer quality food. So it's important to every aspect is the quality of it. Absolutely. Right. So let's. I'll finally get into the mechanisms. I've been jumping back and forwards. So just kind of, again, I want to keep it reasonably simple and clear for people. So basically, so far, what we've discovered is that diabetes is caused by too much glucose in the blood, by eating a high carb diet, and your raised glucose leads to raised insulin, leads to insulin resistance, which leads to diabetes. And your inability to control your blood glucose. But I just wanted to run through some of the science of it so people understand what actually happens in the body and when you have diabetes, because a lot of people don't understand. You know what? I think it was yesterday on Twitter, and there's a lady I follow, and she had commented, she'd put up a post saying that she had a friend with type 2 diabetes, and he said she'd kind of spoke to him about it because she's actually an ex-vegan. She had really bad health condition with vegan, cured them all, going carnivore. And she was speaking to him about it, and he just said, "Oh, I'm comfortable managing my diabetes." And she kind of was posting saying, what's so comfortable about, his health's poor. He has to take all these injections. Like, how well is it managed? And then someone else had quoted her tweet. Some guy basically slated her and saying, I can't believe there's views out there about diabetics and all this stuff. And he basically did a long rant. And one of his points he made was that there was a couple. One was that he has to consume carbohydrates, which again is completely wrong. But what he said was his reason was, if I don't consume enough carbohydrates, then my body will break the protein and the fats down into carbohydrates, and I'll end up with carbs anyway, which is completely and utterly wrong. That doesn't happen at all. There's no science. It doesn't happen. And he's someone with diabetes. I mean, I assume he had diabetes. People like that are just doing it for attention because there's no need for him to attack her. She didn't say anything wrong. She didn't slate people with diabetes. She just summed up that one situation. But, a lot of people with diabetes don't understand how it works. So I wanted to kind of give a description of how it actually works so they can be a bit more informed for when they speak to their doctor, because your doctor probably doesn't know how it works either, and he just wants to prescribe you drugs. And it's good for you to know how it works and to understand. So we'll try and make it as clear as we can. But it's really interesting. And, I say I've learned more and more about diabetes and how it works. And some of the stuff that you learn is not what is taught and understood by the majority. And some of it is very different and very interesting in the methods of how it works. So we'll try and run through some of that for people.
Yeah, as we go on, of course, the nuances are very important.
Essentially, this is something that's kind of not understood fully, is that the raised glucose in type 2 diabetics actually mostly comes from the liver overproducing glucose rather than the glucose ingested. So high carb is what causes the issues, a high carb diet. But what it actually causes is that type 2 diabetics are actually overproducing glucose themselves, which is actually the main issue. So they don't need to be consuming any carbs at all because they're actually producing too much. So gluconeogenesis, we talked about. So that's when your body needs to make glucose, breaks down protein and fat to make it. But it only makes it when it needs it, and it only makes enough to keep your glucose level fine in the blood. Not like that guy said, it doesn't just break it down automatically all the time. So that and glycogenolysis, which again is another tongue twister, but that's basically breaking glycogen down into glucose. They're both accelerated and higher in type 2 diabetics than they are in normal people that aren't type 2 diabetic. So this is because the liver's become insulin resistant, and the liver is where all of this happens. So gluconeogenesis and glycogenolysis happen in the liver. And what's meant to happen is that as insulin goes up, glucagon, which is another hormone, which again, these two work in balance with each other, glucagon should come down as insulin goes up, because glucagon encourages the use of fat for energy. As we said, it's good when we have glucagon up and insulin down, encourages use of fat for energy. It also encourages the body to produce glucose because we're not getting it in from our diet, so we can produce it ourselves for our blood. But when insulin goes up, glucagon should come down. But what happens is when the liver becomes insulin resistant, and also the pancreas does, insulin and glucagon basically stop talking to each other, and glucagon is up, we're producing glucose, then we eat a high carb meal. So now we're already producing glucose, we've had a load of glucose come into our blood, insulin now comes up to try and get rid of the glucose, and glucagon should go down and lower our endogenous production of glucose, but it doesn't. they stop talking to each other because it's become insulin resistant. So we've already got glucose in our blood. We've added a ton from eating a high carb meal, and our liver is still throwing out glucose. So we've basically just got a ton of glucose coming into our bloodstream. And that essentially is what's causing the issues, and for it to be so high.
Yes, an overload.
That's it. So because we have insulin high and stuff becomes insulin resistant, we have fatty cells build up in the liver and the pancreas, and that stops them both working properly. So to say, it's not talking to glucagon, and we're getting just crazy amounts of glucose. And then insulin's got to work even harder and harder. We've got higher insulin levels, and eventually everything collapses. We can't produce so much insulin, and glucose rises, and we're insulin resistant. So that's what it gets to. And a really interesting they found was in tests on mice. So what they did is to test for type 1 diabetes. Basically, in mice, they knocked out their beta islet cells in the pancreas, which produce insulin. So these mice could not produce any insulin. But what they did is they had 2 lots of mice. One of them they did that to, and then fed them their diet. The others, they did that, but then they also removed their ability to produce glucagon. So the first group that were only stopped from producing insulin, they became type 1 diabetic. So whenever they were fed, they could not control their blood glucose. They were type 1 diabetic. The second group, when they were fed, they were able to maintain completely normal glucose levels. So it shows that although we talk about insulin a lot, and insulin is involved a lot, it's actually the relationship between insulin and glucagon is what causes those continued high glucose levels in the blood, because they're overproducing glucose. If glucagon and insulin were working together properly, and if gluconeogenesis was lowered down when it needed to be, they wouldn't have that continued high blood glucose. So that's something which people don't really talk about, but it's actually the glucagon being too high and not being brought down that causes that blood glucose to stay high for so long. Because they have a big high carb meal, but then the body does try to process it and get rid of it, but at the same time it's chucking another load in there, and it makes it basically impossible for it to maintain it and to keep it under control.
Yeah, that's a great summary of the mechanisms behind type 2 diabetes there, and it really does affect you even worse if you already are overweight and you don't exercise or you have a poor lifestyle. That overload is going to accelerate. It's just going to carry on, as opposed to somebody who's perhaps is in a better optimal health condition and has a small period of really high carb intake. Their body can deal with it a lot better.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, as well, one of the things to note is that injected insulin does not solve that problem, because when they inject insulin, it's not going to the pancreas. You're injecting insulin into the body, so it's not injected at that level where it needs to talk to glucagon. So injecting insulin does nothing to cure that problem, which is the main problem. All that does is gives your body more insulin to bring the glucose down, which, as we know, having higher insulin is not a good way to help it. And it does nothing with that problem with glucagon. And one of the interesting they found as well is that no matter how much glucose comes into the body, gluconeogenesis and the production of glucose in your liver will never go to zero. So essentially that tells us that we're not designed to be in high amounts of glucose, because really, when you've got that much glucose coming in your body, and we know that high blood glucose is dangerous, if we were designed to eat lots of glucose, we should be able to shut that off completely, and it will never go to zero. If in a healthy person, it will reduce more when insulin goes up, and obviously in these type 2 diabetics it doesn't, but it will never go to zero. So we're not designed to have huge amounts of glucose coming into our system.
Yeah, which is why gluconeogenesis is such an important process in this. If you allow the process, if you create conditions for that process to take place, keeping very low sugar and very low carb intake.
Yeah, that's it. If you can
that process,
if you can eat as you're meant to, gluconeogenesis is a brilliant process that your body needs to do, but we abuse it, and we abuse our body And, high insulin leads to fat storage in places it shouldn't be. That leads to issues. And then, we've got high glucose. And suddenly then gluconeogenesis, like you say, is then a problem because we're high glucose already and then we're producing more. And we're basically killing ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. And that was a great summary, and it brings us on to the home straight. What would you? I mean, we will go into this for the viewers. We will go into this in more detail. But what's a general outline of good modern dietary advice to avoid the issue or of diabetes and getting to that point? What's some sort of general guidelines that you would recommend?
Yeah. So I think, like you've said, for time purposes, I think next week we can talk in more detail on exactly, what people should eat and how they should eat.
Yeah.
But really, as we've discussed and everything points to, is a low carb diet. And the funny thing is that the NHS, the WHO, the CDC, the ADA, all of these organizations, in their description of what diabetes is, all of them describe it as being a condition of, high blood glucose, and not being able to control it and having food that breaks down to sugar in your bloodstream, causing high blood glucose. So from common sense, you would think that if they all understand and describe that this is a disease of high blood glucose, it would be natural for them to prescribe a diet that was low in sugar. Like, that would make sense, wouldn't it? That would make perfect sense. But they don't. They all prescribe a high carb diet, which is ridiculous because it's the opposite of what they're telling us diabetes is. So it's trying to break through that and get people to understand what diabetes actually is, how it works, and why you need to eat a low carb diet. And that's what people need to aim for. Next week, we'll get into what that entails, and eating patterns and fasting. And we can look at exactly what is prescribed currently for diabetics, which is absolutely terrible what they're currently prescribed. But, from everything we've looked at and from even what these organizations say themselves, diabetes is a disease caused by a high carb diet, by high blood glucose, leading to high insulin. And that's what it's caused by. So a common sense approach, which was our approach for hundreds of years before insulin was invented, a common sense approach is remove glucose and carbohydrates from your diet, and then you won't need it. I've actually heard diabetics before say, if I don't eat carbs, I'll die. I heard a type 1 diabetic say that to me. He's like, well, I have to eat carbs, because what he means is if he doesn't eat carbs, then he doesn't need to take his insulin to balance it out. That just means he needs less insulin. It doesn't mean he'll die. If you lower your carbs, you can lower your insulin. Perfect. You don't need so much. That makes perfect sense. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's trying to get people to understand that. So hopefully today has kind of helped people understand that a bit. And next week we can get into it a bit more on what foods people can eat to deal with that, to treat it, and evidence that works, because there's been lots of studies that have shown that works very well with brilliant results. So we can look at some of that and just maybe recap again the mechanisms and answer any questions if people send in any questions for it.
Yeah, sounds good. Especially the delving more into the types of foods that people should be aiming to eat, and actually it really is quite simple, and we will go into that in more detail. But that was I hope everyone found that really fascinating, and helps to provide more clarity on the topic of diabetes and all the terms around it. What causes it, what are the symptoms, what are the causes, and strategies to avoid it. And a lot of, and continuing to make people aware that a lot of what you hear and see on the mainstream, especially from professionals, isn't actually, a lot of it is not actually, not all of it, but a fair amount of it, especially in the topic of this, is not actually conducive to long-term health.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the aims of this is, to teach people about specific conditions, but also just to make people understand in general how much of an effect what you're eating is having on your health and on these
Yeah,
conditions.
it's huge.
Just understanding, just changing what you eat can have such a huge effect. And people don't really understand that, and they don't really take that on board. And it's just trying to encourage people to understand that, and I would encourage people who are not diabetic. Everyone should be eating what is a low carb diet. Like they found with the 20-year rule. It is less than 100 grams a day eaten over 20 years will give you diabetes. So essentially, everyone should be trying to eat less than 100 grams of carbs per day. In my view, and it's backed up by research as well, that the higher carb you eat, the more likely you are to get diabetes. And people who are really active, there's lots of people like athletes and people who are high carb. They would be able to maybe survive slightly longer because they're using up so much of it by exercise. It's getting used by their muscles instantly. But still, a lot of athletes, when they stop, will develop type 2 diabetes. It still will catch up with everyone. You can't out-exercise a bad diet, as we always say. It will catch up with you. And it's just trying to get that out to people and get them to understand that, you have the power. You can change it. Changing your diet will change your health hugely beyond what you even think, and you have the power to do that. And it's not that hard. It's reasonably simple. And next week we're going to dig deeper into how you can do that.
Yeah, hope everybody enjoyed that. It was great to be on, and thanks, Ryan, for all that information and going into that much detail and the way that you explain it. I hope everybody found that useful through this journey that we're on.
Yeah, hopefully everyone did. And like we said before, get questions in. If you've got questions, get them in, because next week we'll follow up. We'll go into depth on what you can eat to treat it, to prevent it, and what you should be doing. And we'll also answer questions that people have. And the other thing I would say is, if you are interested in sorting out your health, we are doing a 30-day challenge again in January. So get signed up for that, because that's a perfect way to get started in it. We do it. We had brilliant results in this one. People lost huge amounts of weight. They were feeling better. Their health was great. They adjusted to eating this way really easily and got great results. And so get signed up. It's a brilliant way to get started. And in the new year, everyone wants to start fresh in the new year, get your health in order. So I would say, get questions in. Listen again next week. Sign up to the 30-day challenge, and we'll try and get everyone healthier and keep learning and teaching.
Absolutely. And just on that challenge, that's going to give, for those who do participate, is going to give an idea of the launch of the future launch of the platform, and what the subscribing will provide for you, the value that will provide.
Yeah, exactly. So,
looking forward to those participants. I know we've got a couple of repeat ones, and hopefully I'm sure more will follow, and looking forward to seeing life-changing results.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be educational. We're going to be uploading videos, educating, and it gives you a great example of how you can eat that way. It gives you a structure to start from, and you're going to learn, and you're going to be part of a group where we can support each other. And there's going to be great results. It's going to be even more in depth than last time. We're going to have weekly Zoom calls and stuff, so people can ask questions if they need. And it's going to be great. We want to get great results and help people. That's what we're looking to do. It's what we're looking to do with this. We'll continue to do that next week. Thanks again, Barry, for being here. We'll see everyone again next week, and let's get optimal together.